Hmm. I think I'm live. I don't know if I'm live. Why didn't it do what it normally does? Okay. Hi, my name is Douglas Griffin. This is my Sunday school class. We are in the book of Numbers. We've gone through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, the first five books of the Bible. Well, we've gone through four of the five, the Pentateuch. Uh, Genesis covers the children of Israel before they got to Egypt, obviously. Exodus covers the time in Egypt and then them leaving. Leviticus is the law that was given to them once they got to Mount Sinai, where Moses gave the Ten Commandments, so that they could relearn who God is, because they never really had a relationship with God. Abraham did, Isaac kind of did, Jacob eventually did, but his children were raised in Egypt. And their children raised in Egypt, and their children, and there's four generations, 200 years they were in Egypt. And so they've got to relearn who God is. And so in the book of Leviticus, he says, he basically gives them three areas. I've gone over this before. Um, I've got to teach you how to worship me because you've been worshiping those other gods. So the first five commandments are about love the Lord your God and don't have any idols. And I'm teaching you how to treat your neighbor so you don't destroy each other. And then how to preserve your bodies, dietary laws, etc., so that you don't eat the wrong things or touch dead bodies and get sick. Because I need to preserve you alive, because through this people, through this Jewish nation, I'm going to save the rest of the world. I'm going to bring the Messiah, save the rest of the world. So I've got to keep you alive for the next 1,000 years or so, 1,200 years, so that from you can come the Messiah and I can present salvation to the world. He does not cover every sin, just the most glaring ones that will actually cause their death as a people. That's Leviticus. The book of Numbers, he, he takes them to the promised land, but they refuse to go in. So the book of Numbers covers that time period of 40 years while they're wandering around the wilderness. And then the book of Deuteronomy, which we'll get to next, kind of sums up the whole thing. Because now that they're ready to go into, finally after 40 years, the promised land that he promised Abraham, it's like, let's review the contract. And so we'll get there. Because these are the things you need to know to be successful in the new land. And there are principles to that that we can apply to our own lives. But right now we're in the book of Numbers, covering the time while they're wandering in the wilderness. Let me go to not that. So we're in Numbers chapter 20. Open recent. I call this revealing Moses' sin. Words in an S, it's hard to make them plural. Moses' sin. Um, this God is going to let Moses know in this chapter. Here's why you cannot accompany them into the promised land. Some people use this as a single incident. They view this as a single incident, like you can do one thing wrong and then God will just cancel you. But that is not true. Um, and so we'll go through this um, because that's just not true. Can you imagine? We'd all be canceled. So, but God does can see a pattern and say, I can't use you for this reason in this type of situation because I can see the pattern of who you are and how you behave. But I can use you for this situation. And so that's what he's revealing to Moses. So, Numbers chapter 20, verse 1. Then the children of Israel, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed in Kadesh. Now, this first month means the first month of the year, which is when Passover is held. He says, from now on, this will be the first month as far as you're concerned. So it's around March for us. And so they're in Kadesh. Kadesh is this huge area that has a couple wildernesses in it, a couple desert in it. So you might live in this city that has Inglewood and Westchester. They're right next to each other. But the whole area is called Los Angeles, let's say. So Kadesh is this huge area. It says the first month of the year, but this is after 40 years now. We've skipped ahead 40 years. He told them the last couple chapters, you're going to be there for 40 years, and now we've kind of skipped ahead. All we know that during that 40-year period, they kind of wandered around. So we're in that last year now. And we're back at Kadesh, but we're in the wilderness of Zin. The last time we were here in Kadesh, this big area, like I'll call like LA, in this big area, we were in the wilderness of Paran, right next door to the wilderness of Zin. But the area is called Kadesh. And something very important happened then in Numbers chapter 13, just reminding us what happened last time we were here, because it was exactly 40 years ago. Well, really 37, 38 years ago. Well, anyway, okay. So, because they were total of 40 years they were in the wilderness. So the first year they are learning the Ten Commandments, and then in the second year he takes them right to Kadesh and says, now go in, and they say no. So it's really 38 more years, total of 40 years. But they're in the 40th year now. The last time they were here, really 38 years ago, in Numbers chapter 13, verse 26. It says, now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. By the way, Kadesh means holy. So this region that God has declared, this is holy. This is where I gave your instructions so that you can go forward into the promised land. It's a holy area. They sent out spies, and when the spies came back, they gathered the whole congregation together in the wilderness of Paran. At Kadesh is the area. It says they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. See, it's just what God said. They look at all this fruit and these huge grapes that we had to carry on sticks because it's just so incredible. And to this day, that part of Israel produces the best fruit. Okay. Verse 28, nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified. So remember the report that they gave. The cities are fortified, very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. And Anak was the giant. This is Goliath's grandfather. Is it grandfather or great-grandfather? Grandfather. And so there's these people who are at least a couple feet taller. And if you ever stand next to a 6'8" football player or a 7'1" basketball player, you think, I'm not fighting that person. They're huge, right? So in the movies, Goliath is 20 feet tall. They were like 9 feet is huge. 8 feet, 7 feet, that's huge. So they were 7 or 8 feet tall. The average Jewish person was like 5'4" at that moment. So it's like, we can't defeat those people. They're a foot and a half taller than us. They're huge. They're muscular. Nah. So in verse 30 of Numbers 13, Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. But the men who'd gone up with him said, verse 31, we are not able to go up against the people, for they're stronger than we are. So I know what God said, but no, we can't do it. And they were pretty firm. Again, they didn't understand who God was. They understood the Egyptian gods, who supposedly each had little jurisdictions, but you go to them and say, don't let it rain, and it would rain. And you'd go to them and say, I want the sun to come out, and the sun wouldn't come out. So they had learned that gods, you can't count on them because they weren't real. But they had learned, so that's in their thinking, you can go to a god and ask him to do something, but it may not work. So then this God saying, go on and I will protect you. They go, well, he tried, but we can't defeat these people. So they'd never come in contact with a real actual God. So they said, nope, we're not going to do it. In Numbers chapter 14 in Kadesh, verse 1 says, all the congregation lifted up their voices and they cried and they wept. Oh no, he lied to us. He brought us all out here, but they're giants. Verse 2, and all the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, if only we had just died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness. But you're going to take us across and let these giants kill us? No. It says, verse 3, why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? So they said to one another, let us select a leader and we'll return to Egypt. So they totally revolted. This is a complete attitude that is unchangeable and intrenchable. It's I know what God said, and I know He picked Moses, but God doesn't know what He's talking about. Now that's crazy. Again, that's crazy to us today, because we know there's only one God. So, but they're just thinking He's the God of Moses that Moses met in this mountain, but He's not necessarily the God of those people over there. We do tend to kind of think that way. Like in church, God is God of church, but then we go out to the parking lot or go somewhere else, and we don't think God has followed us there. And there are times we can believe God's going to do something, and other times we think, but God didn't know about this bill. God didn't know about my neighbor. There are things that we think God didn't know about. So they think God didn't know about those giants in that land. He's never been over there. Moses met God on that mountain, Mount Sinai over there, but he doesn't know anything about that. So it's like, no. So they said, let's just select a new leader. We'll go back to Egypt. In Numbers chapter 14, verse 29, God tells them, here's what's going to happen. The carcasses of you who have complained against me shall fall in this wilderness. All of you who were numbered according to your entire number. And again, God numbered them at that time to give an accounting so He would know every single one who was there. So they would all, not so He would know, so that they would know all who were there, so they could keep track of each other. So I want you to number and take everybody's name so that you know everybody, because I want everybody to make it over. So it's all of you, your entire number, from 20 years old and above. The 20 years old and under, you had no say. You weren't necessarily steeped in all the stuff of the Egyptians because you're only 20 years old. But these 30-year-olds, 40 years old, 50 or 60 years old, they are so caught up in Egypt. They have such an Egypt mindset, cannot take them over into the new land. So you're going to stay here, except for Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua. Just those two, the son of Nun. You shall by no means enter the land which I swore I would make you dwell in. But your little ones, whom you said would be victims, I'll bring them in, and they shall know the land which you have despised. But as for you, your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness, and your sons shall be shepherds in the wilderness 40 years. So the sons, not you, will be shepherds in this wilderness for 40 years. You'll just lead the sheep around and the cows and all the stuff I've given you for 40 years and bear the brunt of your infidelity, because they could have gone over, but there'll have to be 40 years in this wilderness. But the good news is they'll be learning me then, because they'll just be following like the cloud by day, the fire by night, and they'll learn to follow me. They'll learn to follow me because you have not learned to follow me. You've only had this year or two of following me, but you've had 40 years or 60 years or 80 years of following Egyptian gods. So you'll never make it in the wilderness because you just don't believe me. Verse 34, according to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days? You chose to spy out the land 40 days? It'll be each day you shall bear your guilt 1 year. So namely 40 years. And you shall know my rejection. So for 40 days you doubted me. For 40 days you spied out the land. For 40 days you said, hey, let's check out and see if God knows what He's talking about. So for every day, a year. 40 years, and then you'll be all dead. That whole generation. 2 of you will not be dead, Joshua and Caleb. But the rest of you, from 20 years old and down, then I'll take you in. So that's where we are. 40 years later, they're back at the same place finally. They've been wandering around. They've been shepherds in the wilderness for 40 years. Now, 3 eventful deaths happen in this final year because all the last people had to pass away so that all the people who were supposed to go into the next generation, into the next phase, can go. So the next words are, and Miriam died there and was buried there. Now, Miriam's about 6 to 8 years older than Moses. I say about 8 years older than Moses. Then she had a younger brother, Aaron, maybe 4 years. And then Moses is born 4 years after that. So, and they didn't know Moses that well. Moses, as the baby, was put into the basket floated like the Noah's Ark, floated on the sea, ended up in Pharaoh's court. They didn't grow up with him. But the older sister, who was about 8, followed the little basket in the sea and actually went to work for Moses' family, his new family, the Pharaoh's family, and said, "Oh, I know a woman who can nurse this child for you, my mom." And so he did spend a couple years in that home as a baby from 0 to 2, 3 years old. But then the rest of his life, the next 40 years, he spent in Pharaoh's court. So they didn't know him that well, but they're older than him. So at this point, she's probably 127, 28. So Miriam died, not as some punishment for sin. She was 128. We'll find out that Aaron was about 123 when he passed, and then Moses is going to pass. So that last 3 people, that generation, Moses is going to pass at 120. That's good. It's not not you'll die here. They're in their 120s. So Miriam passes away first, and then in Numbers chapter 20, verse 2, it says, "Now there was no water for the congregation." It's been 40 years that this has been happening, but actually the water thing had kind of been taken care of, right? But they should have learned by now that God provides after 40 years. So it says, "Now there's no water for congregation." So they gathered together against Moses and Aaron, and they're complaining again. So what he's about to do, um, in God saying him go to the rock and get water out of the rock, I want to explain why that had spiritual significance. In Exodus chapter 17, verse 5, when the first plague of Israel came, the first plague on Egypt came, it said, I'm sorry, let me back up. Before the first plague came, I want to explain why the first plague came the way it did, because it took 10 plagues for Pharaoh to finally let go and let the children of Israel go, as we know, right? The very first plague, here's what it was, a judgment, because all of it was judgment. None of it was a magic show, which is how Cecil B. DeMille presented it. Like God's trying to impress Pharaoh, and we go, "Oh, that was good. Can you turn my curtains into shutters?" He wasn't trying to do some. Each plague was a judgment on them. So um, when so he, so the first time that they were out of water, the first time they were out of water in the wilderness, in Exodus 17, here's what God said. The Lord said to Moses, "Go on before the people and take with you some of the elders of Israel. Also take in your hand your rod with which you struck the river and go." So remember, the first time they were out of water 40 years earlier, he said, "I want you to go and take the rod with which you struck the river." And that was the time he struck the river, was that first plague, that first judgment. Here's why that first judgment came. In Exodus chapter 1, verse 22, it says, "So Pharaoh commanded all of his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the river," talking about the Nile River, "and every daughter you shall save alive." So because he had heard this prophecy about this Messiah-like figure, this Moses person who was coming as a baby, he needed them dead. All these kids were dead. "I need them all dead. They're multiplying too much." And so he sent out a general edict to kill all the sons. So during this 1 or 2 year period where he's doing this, there's probably 100 babies that were killed, which is a horrible thing. There weren't millions, but it doesn't matter. There was one baby that's killed. So there's probably hundreds of babies who were killed and then dumped into the river, into the Nile River. And so there's blood in the Nile River of these babies. So the very first plague that God sends Moses to do, which is judgment, not a magic act to impress Pharaoh, is in Exodus chapter 7, verse 20. It says, "And Moses and Aaron did so just as the Lord commanded. So he lifted up the rod and he struck the waters that were in the river, the Nile River, in the sight of Pharaoh." He did it right in front of Pharaoh and in the sight of Pharaoh's servants. And all the waters that were in the river were turned to blood. So this was judgment. You spilled Jewish blood. children of Israel blood in the rivers, these babies. So I'm showing you what you did. And the blood shed, this is judgment. This bloodshed is judgment. And the rod struck the river and turned water to judgment. So he says, I want you to take that same rod with which you struck the river. This is the first time that the children of Israel complained 40 years earlier. Take that same rod that brought judgment and struck the river. He says, behold, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb. This is Exodus chapter 17, verse 6. And you shall strike that rock, and water will come out of it, that the people may drink. So now he's turning that idea of that rod was struck and brought judgment into now it's bringing salvation. It's bringing refreshing. Water's going to come up, people may drink. And so Moses did so on the side of Israel. Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 4, he says, they all drank of the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. So he's saying that's symbolic of the Messiah, to where that rod brought judgment and you struck it like Jesus was struck on the cross. He was whipped and the blood shed, right? But it also brought salvation. And so how that rod struck the river, take that same rod that you struck the river that bring judgment, now strike the rock, and it brings healing. It brings, right? It brings nourishment. So he's saying that was a picture in their mind, so that when their Messiah was struck and he bled, they also understood that Messiah needs to be struck so that judgment is necessary, but there's also healing attached. There's a double thing that happens on the cross. He bears our judgment, he bleeds, but by his blood, we're also healed. By his stripes on his back, we're also healed. Okay, so that was the first time they went and they asked for water. So he called the name of the place Massah, which means testing. This is where God tested us. And Meribah, which means complaining, because of the contention, the complaining of the children of Israel, because they tempted the Lord. They tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? So they're like putting God through a test. God was actually putting them through a test. Are you going to believe me or not? So because of the complaining and because of the testing, it was called Massah Meribah. Now this new place is Meribah Kadesh. They complained at the holy place. So the people are complaining. Numbers chapter 20, verse 3. The people contended with Moses and spoke, saying, if only we had died when our brethren died before the Lord. Now, died before the Lord. They're referring back to this judgment that came at various times in the past 40 years where the earth opened up and swallowed people. They're saying, at least they had a quick death. Boom. But we're just going to die of thirst. It's going to be this agonizing death in the wilderness. Now, it's been 40 years they've been in the wilderness, and God supplied their needs every day. But suddenly they've lost their minds, and that's what we do. At whatever age we are, we're 30, we're 40, we're 60, we're 80, at whatever age we are, we lose our minds when everything looks bad because we think God has forgotten how to provide our needs. And so they are anticipating this long, drawn out, they're going to die of thirst. It'd be better that we just died instantly, like when the earth opened up and swallowed those people, than we die like this. Verse 4 of Numbers 20, why have you brought up the assembly of the Lord in this wilderness, that we and our animals should die here? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? So although for 40 years they had learned to follow God, they still hadn't learned to trust him to provide for them. And why have you made us come up out of the Egypt to bring us to this evil place? Is not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranate. No, it is not a place, sorry. It is not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, nor is there any water to drink. Now there had been water, but he was bringing them back to Kadesh because he was ready to take them over. So for 40 years he provided, but now that we're ready to go to this new era, this new thing, he took them back and they immediately complained, why, I don't get it, why you've brought us here. Verse 6, so Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and they fell on their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. Verse 7, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the rod. So this is the same rod, the rod that you struck the river and brought judgment, the rod that you struck the rock and brought salvation, and it represented God's healing. Now take the rod, you and your brother Aaron, and gather the congregation together and speak to the rock before their eyes. Because once salvation is beginning, you don't have to strike it anymore. We don't have to hang Jesus a second time. We don't have we don't have to do he what was purchased for us is permanent. So we don't have to take Jesus back to the cross and beat him and every time we have a need, Lord, let me talk you into healing me. I got to talk you. No, I've already provided. That's why we make our prayers known with thanksgiving. Lord, we thank you for what was provided. We're not asking you to provide it like you just thought of this. Lord, you didn't know this, but this my rent's due at the middle of the month. And God's going, what? Again? Oh my God. Somebody needs to write a calendar for me. None of this is how God is thinking. He's provided. We need to change our thinking. Say, Lord, I know somewhere is the answer out there. I know the answer is out there. And so I'm just going to trust that you're going to show me the answer. You're going to lead me to the answer because I know it's there. I know this did not surprise you. So just speak now. Just speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield its water. And thus you shall bring water for them out of the rock and give drink to the congregation, their animals, and they'll see, oh, we just have to talk to God. Because again, this were the people who did not want to talk to God. Moses, you talk to God, we don't want to talk to God. So he's trying to train them. I'm not this scary God of lightning and thunder. I'm someone you can talk to. So I need you to demonstrate to them, Moses, because this is not how they have a relationship with me. And some people only have a relationship with God through their pastor. I'm in trouble, they're going to call the pastor. And he's like, no, you could have your own personal relationship with me. It's okay to call the pastor. But know that you can also have your own personal relationship with me. So this is what, Moses, I need you to teach them this. Numbers chapter 20, verse 9. So Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron, verse 10, gathered the assembly together before the rock. And he said to them, hear now, you rebels. Must we bring water for you out of this rock? Now, this is a problem because God was using this time to demonstrate the opposite. Let them see that you just need to speak. Let them see that you just need to say, Lord, we need water, and water's going to flow. Instead, he uses this as an occasion to yell at them and scream at them and call them rebels, and he's actually the one being a rebel. And he's saying, must we bring water out of this rock? And he's acting like God is not there at all, like it's him performing this trick, and he's so pressed that I can't believe you are making me do this. And as long as we think, oh, look how you're pulling on me, and this is all on me, and don't understand that it's all God, then yeah, you're going to be angry because you think it's all up to you to solve it. It's all up to you and you're going to be mad and resentful because you think it's you. Once you know that it's God, then the pressure's off of you. So this anger that Moses has is his problem. That's why I always call him Anger Man, because this is his continuing problem. It's a pattern throughout his whole life. This is why he could not go it wasn't this one incident. This is why he could not go in. Let's check back in Exodus chapter 2, verse 11. It says, now it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, so when Moses is 40 years old, that he went out to his brethren, and he looked at their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he looked this way, that way. And when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. This is how Moses is. I'm going to have to solve this. He looked this way and that way and said, and let his anger come out and didn't say, Lord, what are we going to, I solve the problems and I kill. And that's how it's handled. There. Glad that's done. And he buried him in the sand. And of course, God blew the wind off of the Egyptian the next day, and everybody knew what Moses did, which is why he ran to the wilderness, because that wasn't God's plan. So, uh-oh, I got caught. Yes, because I didn't tell you to kill an Egyptian. What are you, crazy? Numbers chapter 11, verse 11. After he's brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, as he's brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, and he's having to pasture them for a while. Numbers 11:11. So Moses said to the Lord, why have you afflicted your servant? Why have I not found favor in your sight that you have laid the burden of all these people on me? God's like, oh, really? You parted the Red Sea and you brought water out of the You've laid the burden of all these people on me. Did I conceive all these people? Did I begat them? That you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a guardian carrying a nursing child to the land which you swore to the fathers. He just means carry them in your heart. You don't have to heal them. You don't have to bring Moses, you're not doing anything. I'm just asking you to love the people. And Moses is like, no, I can't do it. And it felt like a burden to me because he's just anger man. He didn't like these people. He ran from them 40 years ago, and now he has to pastor them. Verse 13, where am I to get meat to give all these people? And again, God's thinking, you don't have to get meat from nowhere. Who's asking you to do all this stuff? For they weep all over me, saying, give us meat that we may eat. I am not able to bear all these people alone because the burden is too heavy for me. If you treat me like this, please kill me here and now. If I have found favor in your sight, and do not let me see my wretchedness. So, kill me. So this is over dramatic Moses. If I have to bear these people, just kill me now. I can't take it. So he's angry. He doesn't like the people, which is why God kept echoing Moses' word back to him. I'm going to kill all those people, so that Moses could learn to say, no, don't kill them, Lord. He's trying to teach him to be an intercessor and love these people. But this is a pattern in Moses' life. In Exodus chapter 32, when they got to Mount Sinai, because this was all before they even got to Mount Sinai. This is just the first month of Moses leading these people. When they got there and God went up in the hill with Moses, I mean, God was already on the hill. Moses went up in the hill with God, and God gives him the 10 commandments. In verse 15 of Exodus 32, it says, and Moses turned and went down from the mountain, and the 2 tablets of the testimony were in his hand. And the author makes sure you know who did this. The tablets were written on both sides, and on the one side and on the other side they were written. And now the tablets were the work of God. God did this. God carved them out of the mountain, and God wrote on them. So verse 16, now the tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved in the tablets. So he's making sure you know this is who the tablets belong to. God simply placed them in Moses' hand. Verse 19, so it was as soon as he came near the camp that he saw the calf and the dancing. So Moses' anger became hot, because that's who he is, and he cast the tablets out of his hands and he broke them at the foot of the mountains. These were not his tablets. He did not write them. He did not carve them. But again, he's taking it upon himself. I'm upset. I'm angry. And he forgets all about God. God doesn't exist. Just like when he killed the Egyptian, he looked around. And so I'm upset. And he breaks the tablets just to show everybody how angry he is. He's breaking God's commandments. He's breaking them. So in the next chapter, in 2 chapters later, in Exodus chapter 34, verse 1, the Lord says to Moses, cut 2 tablets of stone like the first ones, and I will write on these tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. Because he wants him to know, I didn't tell you to do that. You broke these tablets. You did this. No one asked you to. You broke my tablets, so you cut them out of the mountain now. So Moses has 2 problems. He's mad at the people and he's calling them rebels, which is the opposite of what God said. Go and speak to the rock and water will flow, and you'll be able to. You rebels. And the second problem is what he's saying. Look, do we have to do this? And Moses had a problem of losing sight that God was doing it, and being angry at the people all the time. This was a pattern for his whole life, that even at the age of 120, 40 years in Egypt, 40 years in the wilderness by himself, 40 more years in the wilderness with his people, he's 120. He still hadn't learned. He still hadn't gotten over his anger. He had not changed. This is who he was. And he's saying, taking it all upon himself. In Acts chapter 12, Herod the third or the fourth, or because all those kings were named. Herod was named Herod, and then his son, he named his sons Herod, like George Foreman, and named his sons George. So this is the final Herod, who's Herod after Jesus has risen from the dead and gone up to heaven. In Acts chapter 12, verse 21, so it says, so on a set day, Herod, this is the final Herod, arrayed in royal apparel, sat on his throne and gave an oration to the people. And the people kept shouting, the voice of a God and not a man. And he's shouting to them, this is the voice of a God, you are not a man. And that's his opportunity to say, oh no, I'm a man. Don't put me up with God. But no, he didn't do that at all. He said, yes, yes, yes. In verse 23, it says, then immediately an angel of the Lord struck him because he did not give glory to God.
Uh-oh.
And he was eaten by worms and died.
Wow.
So God says, I will not share my glory with another. Surprise. You think, yes, I'm a God. Well, no, you're not. You're just worm food. So Moses is actually putting his life in his hands when he's saying, we have to bring water. And they're not acting like God is in it at all. So but again, this has been a pattern in Moses' life. He forgets that God is there. He takes everything on himself. I'm going to kill the Egyptians. I have to do this. If I have to do this all by myself, then just kill me now. And I can't believe that this is Moses' pattern. It never changed. So this incident is an example of why Moses couldn't go further. But this one thing did not cancel Moses. God doesn't live on a scale like that. Humans do. Humans have to evaluate you because they don't know how you'll be in the future. So they might give you a single test that you pass or fail so they can try to evaluate so they can guess how you perform in the future. God's already seen your future. So there's never that one incident that eliminates you because he already knows. He doesn't need that kind of test so that he can evaluate, I wonder if this person's going to be good or bad. Oh, well, you failed the test. He knows who you are. So he's already made a decision of how he's going to use you. He used Moses in the wilderness for 40 years to pastor these people. But he couldn't use them in the next phase because in the next phase, he couldn't have somebody who was doing his own thing all the time and always angry with the people because he's trying to teach people a new way to relate to them. In the promised land, I'm trying to teach you a new way to relate to me. So in Numbers chapter 20, verse 11, it says, Moses lifted his hands and struck the rock twice with his rod. And water came out abundantly, and the congregation, their animals drank. So God was merciful, even though Moses did the opposite of what he told him to do. And David wrote about this a couple hundred years later. In Psalm 106, verse 32, it says, they angered God, also at the waters of strife, so that it went ill with Moses on account of them, because they rebelled against his spirit. The people rebelled against God. So the people were, but if God's not angry, you don't get to be angry. If God's not plaguing the person, you don't. Then that's just you thinking you're God. You know, we look at people. If God's not cursing the person, well, God doesn't know what He's doing. I'm mad at you. I'm going to punish you. Okay, let's see how that works out. So because they rebelled against the Spirit, so that Moses spoke rashly with his lips and said, "You rebels," and you know. But that's how Moses was. He could be provoked by the people. God needed a leader who was separate from the people, who was not moved by the people, who was not always, because the people are going to mess up. You need a leader who is separate from that, who can hear God and say, here's what God's saying to you right now, as opposed to, look how you're messing up. Let me tell you what I think. So Moses couldn't go with him because of who he was over his whole life, not because of a single incident that happened. A single incident cannot cancel you. God is not that way. But he used Moses in another way. He just couldn't use him for this other phase. So it wasn't some sort of punishment. Moses was 120. And he had said in Numbers chapter 14, verse 30, except for Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun, you shall by no means enter the land which I swore I would make you dwell in. God had already said 40 years earlier, only Caleb and Joshua of this generation is going to go in. He didn't say, oh yeah, and Moses and Aaron, you're going to go in too. He had predicted 40 years earlier that it would only be Caleb and Joshua from that generation who would accompany the people in. So this did not disqualify Moses. God had already said you weren't going to go with them in. This was just this incident that God used to illustrate to Moses so Moses could understand why he wasn't going in. So God will use an incident to explain to us, but he already knew. That's not when God found out. So in Numbers chapter 20, verse 12, it says, and the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron and says, because you did not believe me, to hallow me, to make me holy in the eyes of the children of Israel. Therefore, you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I've given them. So apparently, Aaron was in on it because you did not just trust me. You did not, I said, just speak to the light. And you're like, no, God, I'm doing it my way because you're getting old. You're slipping. These people need punishment. They need some yelling at because that's what's going to really provoke them and make them feel bad. And sometimes that's what we want people to feel bad. And that's going to really change them. And it doesn't. It just makes them feel bad. So God knows when we need grace and when we need mercy, and that's what's going to move us. Moses, you don't know that. You can't put yourself in the position of God. Aaron, you can't put yourself in the position of God. So because of this, he says, because you, and he's not, again, not saying this incident, he says, this is a sort of thing, is what he's saying, as to why you won't bring the assembly in. But he'd already told 40 years earlier that he's not going to bring the assembly in. Um, in Luke chapter 22, Jesus looks at Peter and says, I prayed for you that your faith should not fail. But when you've returned to me, strengthen your brethren. Like, I know that you're going to betray me tonight. You think if something would eliminate somebody, striking a rock is much less harmful than betraying Jesus. If an incident could eliminate you, Paul going around and killing people, I mean, there's so many things that people did that you would think would have eliminated them. Jesus is talking to Peter, who's about to deny him on the night that he's crucified. He's going to desert him. You would think, well, this is going to eliminate you from being my. But no, I know your quality, Peter, and I know, and a single incident. This is not indicative of who you are. This is indicative of your fear right now because you don't understand what's happening. But who you are is somebody who's bold. Who you are is something that jumps in a situation and speak that I can trust with these new things I'm about to do. That you'll just jump in and do them. You'll say, "Hey, look, Gentiles can be saved. Hey, look, I can have some pork." You know, that you will say you're that sort of person, Peter, that will go with the new stuff and help preach the new covenant. So that quality you have, that's why I'm choosing you. This particular incident where you goofed up and denied me is not eliminating you, Peter. It cannot eliminate you. A single incident can't. God doesn't go, no, you messed up now. He doesn't pick a single incident. He's looking at the quality of your entire life and who you are. And since God sees who we are, he knows where to place us. You're this kind of person, so I'm going to give you this sort of ministry. And we all have a ministry. Again, even if it's just looking out for your neighbor and checking in on them. Like I mentioned a couple weeks ago, how I have a relative who was just checking on a neighbor. Or actually, the neighbor was checking on the relative, I found out. And because the neighbor's just curious. Gee, they haven't picked up their mail in a couple days, and 2 or 3, and called the police, and the police went in and found the person had passed away. And am I my neighbor's keeper? Yeah, And even if your ministry is just making sure your grandkids are okay, God knows He's given all of us some sort of ministry. Somebody to check in on. Some people has more quantity of people, but not more quality. Because one life and 10,000 lives, they're equal to God. That's why the shepherd leaves the 99 and goes after the one sheep. So if there's one person that you've kind of helped, God says that's fantastic. So he knows who we are and knows where to put us. But one thing doesn't eliminate. I was going to put you in this great place, but sorry, you messed up. So I'm just going to put you over here and give you, choice B. There is no choice B. Everything's choice A for God. He's already knows who we are and already has it planned out. But people will get you depressed and make you think you can mess up, and then God's going to put you on the garbage heap and not use you anymore. That's not true. So in Numbers chapter 20, this is the last verse I'm going to do. This is just part 1. Numbers chapter 20, verse 13. It says, this was the water of Meribah. Again, Meribah means complaining. So there's 2 places that he named Meribah. There was Massa Meribah. And again, Massa means testing, and Meribah means complaining. So there was one place that they tested God, where he tested them, and they complained. This was Meribah Kadesh, where they complained at the holy place. So this was the water of Meribah because the children of Israel contended or complained with the Lord, and he was hallowed, holy among them. So he was made, they were able to see. When we see who God is, that's when we holy him. When we see, I get him, I get his character, I understand how merciful he is, how gracious he is, how righteous he is, and that there's only one of him, that's when we make him holy, separate from everything else. But when we make him like every other God and thing that we worship, well, I'll try my horoscope today. I didn't like that. I'll try this rabbit foot today. Okay, I'll just grab a Bible verse today. And we're equating him on this. We're not making him holy. We're making him the same as everybody else. Let me read my lucky Bible verse today. Okay, it says I'm going to have a good day because I read the right verse. as opposed to having a relationship with him and understanding that God transcends all those things. He's above all those things. He's different from all those things. That's when we make him holy. And so in their eyes, finally he was made holy. Like, I'm different. You think you're just going to strike the rock and no, no. Even though Moses messed up, water still came out of the rock. Even though Moses did all the, I still blessed the people. Even though they contended and complained, I'm different because I'm going to bless you anyway because I'm merciful. And so in their eyes he was holy. So it was Meribah Kadesh, the complaining at the holy place. Okay, so we're just going to look at that first part of Numbers chapter 20. We'll do the rest of it next week. And I am teaching in the New Testament. So some of you only listen on Sundays, and that's fine. We're in the Old Testament on Sundays. On Wednesdays, I'm in the New Testament. We're in the book of Luke. And so I would invite you, those of you only listen on Sundays, I'll let you know when I'm teaching in the book of Revelation, and then you can switch over to Wednesdays also. Um, all right. Again, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see some of you next week. All right. Bye bye.